And we are back once again with the Horror Guys.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin.
I'm Brian.
We're going to talk about horror movies this week.
Shock and awe.
Yeah.
We got horror movies again.
That's
so much better than our musical theater episodes.
Yes, it is. It's more in the genre that we're interested in, yeah. And this is not new movies, but some older and not quite so old stuff. And yeah, we got a mix today of years.
4 weeks ago, we did 1980s sci-fi films. 3 weeks ago, we did all 2023 films. Last week, we did this special 1988 episode. And this week, it's just miscellaneous old stuff.
Yep, we got 70s, 80s, 60s, 2000s. Yep.
I think this is probably our slow point of the year for new horror movies. Everybody's saving things for Halloween season. Mm-hmm. The stuff that didn't make it out last year is coming past, and the stuff for this year is waiting.
And now they're waiting for Halloween.
I see like Shudder has only like 6 movies coming, and we've seen them all next month.
Yeah, that's sad. Yeah, we're going to take a break from Shudder probably.
Well, this is the problem. We've done over 1,500 horror movies.
Finding
new
that.
There's new stuff and really obscure old stuff. We're starting to run out of the easy pickings.
They need to make new things, more new things.
Well, what do we got this week?
Oh, we have Burnt Offerings. That's a 70s flick. I've lost my year, exactly what year. Yeah, 76. I was going to say 73, that ain't right. And then we'll catch up with Norman Bates in Psycho 2 and Psycho 3 from 83 and 86. And we'll answer the question, whatever happened to Baby Jane? We'll finally know. And that happened in 1962.
I think there's been remakes.
And there has been remakes.
This is the original.
We speak of the original, yeah. And I saw the one of the remakes. I think there's more than one, but with the Redgrave sisters, Lynn and Vanessa Redgrave. And that was really excellent.
There's really 2 of them? It's not like one?
They're not the same person. They're 2 different sisters, yeah. And also, our bonus ones are High Life, which is highly sci-fi. Kind of pushing it to call it horror, but that's from 2018, and The Orphanage, which was definitely horror, from 2007.
And we're not going to talk about High Life in The Orphanage here, but if you'd like to read our full synopses and review, go over to horrorbulletin.com, and it was in episode 230 there. So basically everything we do goes into the Horror Bulletin newsletter every week.
Which you can subscribe to.
And it's free. You just put your email in and you'll get that. And nothing else. There's no spam. We don't do anything else.
We won't sell your contact information to the highest bidder.
No.
Although if there were some high bidders, boy, that would be tempting. Just saying, if you want to bid.
Way to build confidence, Kevin. Yeah.
No,
basically you get one email a week with all our reviews in it, and that's usually the 4 that we do on our podcast, plus 2 bonus ones, and of course usually a short. Sometimes we mix it up a little bit. But you'll get 7 reviews on most of the time on the email each week. Not 7 emails, one email with 7 reviews. Or you can just go to horrorguys.com and get the 4 reviews that we talk about here and our short film each week. And you don't have to sign up for anything for that, but you miss out on the 2 bonus ones.
And the website has links to buy nifty books.
There's all kinds of nifty books.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the Horror Bulletin Monthly. We're up to issue 21, which should be available by the time you hear this. And basically, each month we compile all the reviews, usually 31 or so, depending on how many days a month there are, and compile them into a monthly print magazine, which you can put on your bookshelf and read all you want.
Uh-huh.
It's also available as Kindle and Kobo and Barnes and all the ebooks.
Wherever fine ebooks are sold.
Especially horrorguysshop.com. But not just that, we also have our Horror Guys guides. Boy, this just turned into a full commercial, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Well, we have to sponsor ourselves because nobody else has stepped up. If you're listening and you want to sponsor us, just saying.
If you don't want to sponsor us, just buy the books.
Yeah, or just listen.
Yeah, the newest one out is the Horror Guys Guide to the Horror Films of Peter Cushing. Every horror film Cushing did, plus a few other important ones that he did. And if you think that sounds like a cool idea, we've also got the Horror Guys Guide to the Horror Films of Vincent Price, the Horror Guys Guide to the Horror Films of Roger Corman, and both of those take those 3 people and do everything they did in the horror genre. Of course, then there's also certain studios that are done. We've got the Horror Guy's Guide to the Universal Studios Shock Theater and Son of Shock, which is all the old Universal movies. And between those two books, it's something like 60 or so movies. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's more than
We
that.
watch a lot of movies.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, we got the Hammer horror films, which is all 62 or 66 of the Hammer horror films. The Silent Age of Horror, which is a selection of 30 or so of the best silent films. And if you're not up on silent films and you think you might want to be, this is a great place to start, because there's a lot of crappy silent films out there that you can watch on YouTube that are really boring. But this picks out the best ones.
This will pick out the best ones for you.
If you're not sure what to watch, pick this up and go through it. And there's one coming up in the next month or so, the Horror Guy's Guide to Amicus films. Not just their horror movies, not just their portmanteau anthologies, but everything that Amicus did.
And they did some weird things.
They did a James Bond movie.
Yeah,
Sort of.
Yeah, James Bond ripoff. Yeah.
The dollar store James Bond. Yeah, they did.
Which was actually kind of entertaining.
I thought it was pretty better than we expected.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Oh, well, anyway, we're talking about horror today, eventually, I suppose.
And
you ever read the Reddit posts where people say, can you recommend a podcast without a whole lot of banter?
Uh-oh.
That's not us this week.
Uh-oh.
Blah, blah, blah.
So we should get to Burnt Offerings, which happened in 1976.
You smell the smoke from the burnt offerings?
And there were no real burnt offerings in this. It's kind of a misleading title. There were offerings.
Now that you mention it,
They weren't
I don't see the relevance.
They weren't burnt. Yeah.
What offerings?
Offerings to the house and the powers and and
Boy, that's stretching it.
yeah, it was kind of life.
It's a haunted house
force
movie,
kind of-
basically.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, directed by Dan Curtis, the guy who did The Night Stalker, and a whole lot of... Did he do Night Stalker?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, he did the Jack Palance Dracula. He did Dark Shadows. A lot of these kind of things. But this is actually good. Written by William F. Nolan, Dan Curtis, and Robert Marasco. Stars Karen Black, Oliver Reed, Burgess Meredith, and Betty Davis, where she plays a cranky old woman, believe it or not. 1 hour, 56 minutes.
That's a stretch.
Spoiler-free what happens.
Well, this one builds nicely, gradually revealing what's going on, and there's a satisfying conclusion. The cast is great, and it still holds up pretty well after all this time. It's a worthy watch.
It's
If you
kind
haven't
of
ever seen it,
grainy and washed out looking, but other than that,
76, they haven't remastered it.
yeah, it didn't look great. But it holds up good. There's really no special effects.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was good.
I heard it said that Betty Davis and Oliver Reed
Hated each other.
hated each other. Yeah, she wouldn't. She'd just refer to him as that man.
The most vile man I've ever worked with.
I can't find any details on
We don't know what he did.
what the animosity was, but yeah, it was there, I guess.
He probably walked around slapping her butt or something like that, and she's old enough to be his grandmother.
Naked chugging beer and yeah. Yeah,
Oliver Reed, who knows?
yeah. Don't know.
All right, so Marion, Ben, and David drive to the big house in the country. It's a huge old place, and they're all surprised at the size of it. Walker, the handyman, lets them in. They are expected. It's all very nice looking inside, but the outside is totally neglected. Marion repeats, "Oh, such waste." And the house is hundreds of years old.
Yeah, and it's looking shabby around the edges.
I don't think I really remembered at the end how bad the house looked. Because it didn't look that bad at the end.
Yeah. There's yeah.
Well, we'll get to that.
We're spoiling. Yeah.
Roz Allardyce comes downstairs and bosses Walker around. They snip at each other. Roz says they'll need to tend to the place and maintain it. The house takes care of itself, she says. That said, it's an unbelievably cheap rental, $900 for the whole summer. And this is a mansion.
And yeah.
Did we look up what that would be in today's dollars?
Huge grounds and not much.
Like $3,000 or something like that, which is a good chunk of money, but for a place like this all summer.
Yeah, pool and huge grounds and huge house. Yeah.
It was a deal.
Greenhouse. Yeah.
Well, Roz's brother Arnold rolls in a wheelchair. They both love the old house and say it's practically immortal. Ben keeps waiting for the catch, as the price is crazy low. The catch is that the Allardyce's ancient mother needs to stay there up in the attic. She's got her own suite up there, and all they need to do is feed the old woman 3 times a day.
Yep, she won't be any trouble. Just she's got to be there, though.
Who goes on vacation and leaves
That's
crippled grandma
odd.
in the attic?
Yeah, shut in grandma. Yeah, that's an odd way to do it.
All right.
But they go with it.
Yep, Walker carries in a dead plant, but Arnold tells him to look again. It's not as dead as he thought it was.
And there's some foreshadowing right there.
It's rejuvenated.
Yeah.
Well, Ben and the family leave to discuss the situation. He swears the deal is too good to be true. Marion gets all whiny, and Ben gives in, so they take the deal. The family returns, along with Aunt Elizabeth, Ben's old aunt, and when they arrive, the Allardyce duo have already left with a note on the door, and they're not there. Bye, take care of Granny.
Yeah, which just seems a little odd, but
What if they hadn't come
They
back?
go with it, yeah. Granny would have starved upstairs, I guess.
Marion checks in on the old woman who lives upstairs. We don't see her, but she's apparently in her bedroom, and her sitting room has a zillion old photos in it. Marion tells Ben and Elizabeth not to go up there, as the old woman will be her responsibility. David shows Ben how to start up the pool pump, so then they have to clean up that nasty-looking mess. Later, the two find an old graveyard full of Allardyces on the property. Once again, Marion finds the food she carried up to the old woman is mostly uneaten. We never see the old woman, and she's barely eaten in a week, and no one assumes that she's dead or dying at this point. Still, some of the food is being consumed.
So she must be there. Right? Food's being eaten.
I don't know, I was suspecting rats at this point.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't suspect rats at this point.
There was obvious that something weird was going on.
But something odd.
They don't suspect it,
yeah.
though.
And how we never see her. Yeah.
Well, Ben finds a broken pair of glasses in the swimming pool, which disturbs him for some reason. Ben and David start wrestling in the pool, and Aunt Elizabeth gets upset. Ben gets very carried away and nearly drowns David. Meanwhile, Marion is in some kind of trance in the old woman's attic room and misses the whole thing. What was up with the eyeglasses?
I don't know.
Did the eyeglasses possess him?
Maybe.
That seems odd.
Yeah, I don't know what the connection was.
Well, him finding the eyeglasses had something to do with him going crazy at that point, but I'm not quite sure why.
Yeah.
Well, that night, Ben has nightmares about his mother's funeral. He and Marion then argue, and he feels terrible about hurting David. He admits that he wanted to hurt David, but he doesn't know why. He starts wondering at his own sanity. The next morning, Marion tries to distract Ben by setting up an office for him. David is terrified of Ben now. Now, Ben is his real father, right? He's not like the stepdad?
Right.
Yeah, I thought so, yeah.
Yeah.
Ben invites Marion to the pool, and he wants to get frisky, but she's not into him anymore. He tries to make love to her, but she begs him not to, but doesn't explain why not. She always starts hanging out in the old woman's room, but we don't know if she's ever actually even met the old woman who supposedly lives there. Aunt Elizabeth and Marion have a talk about Marion's new gray hair. Elizabeth is feeling old and tired since coming to the house.
Yeah, and she's looking more haggard.
Yeah, she looked like a spry 50s or something when she moved in, and now she's looking like 70s grandma.
Yeah, they youthed her. Yeah, between her
They youthed her down and aged her up.
Her acting abilities and makeup. Yeah, it was a good effect. Yeah.
Ben has a waking flashback to the creepy chauffeur from his mother's funeral. And I'm going to read the whole thing, but if you don't want to get spoiled, you should probably skip ahead a little bit here. Ben wakes up that night and smells gas. He breaks into David's room, where the gas is running wide open. He carries David out and smashes a window to let the gas out. In the morning, Elizabeth says she looked in on David last night, but she'd remember if she'd have turned on the gas. Probably. Wouldn't she? She seems confused, and her hair is much grayer. Marion gets positively nasty with Ben's now sickly old aunt. Ben takes Elizabeth's side and confronts Marion about it. Ben wants to meet the old woman upstairs who Marion spent so much time with. He senses that something isn't right with his wife. Ben points out that the summer's almost over and that Marion is entirely too attached to this house. They're going to have to leave it soon.
And along the way here, too, the greenhouse was full of dead plants. And now those plants are all thriving. And, you think, oh, well, Marion's, taking really good care of the greenhouse and everything. It's not just that, yeah. And also, at one point, he notices, wow, you know the grounds and the pool and everything's looking so good. You really put a lot of work into this, and she's saying, yep, and she didn't do a darn thing. It just happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He suggests leaving right away, but she flips out on him. David screams, Elizabeth is dying up in her room. Ben tries to call every doctor in town, but all the numbers are busy, even the operator. We watch as Marion takes another tray of food up to the old woman's room, and then she eats it herself.
What? Yeah, so that's where the food's going.
Ben and Elizabeth both see the creepy chauffeur in her room, and he rolls a coffin at them. Elizabeth dies in reality, and they all go to the funeral except for Marion, who doesn't want to leave the obviously non-existent old woman upstairs alone. Ben gets angry and demands that Marion open the old woman's door. He insists that they pack up and leave the house. Marion is obsessed with her job as caregiver for the old woman. Well, it starts to rain, and Ben watches as the boards and the tiles outside fall off the house, and they're being replaced by new ones. It's kind of a neat effect.
The house is shedding its old skin, yeah.
Yeah, and growing new boards and new shingles.
Yeah, very cool.
The house is regenerating itself. Marion, up in that room, watches Ben and David run out to the car. They don't even slow down to wait for Marion, but they do stop when a tree falls and blocks the road.
They cannot leave. It's not letting them leave.
Ben goes out to move the tree, and he's grabbed by vines that won't let him through. Marion catches up to them and drives them back to the house. You're part of it, he snarls, and she doesn't deny it. Marion calls the doctor for Ben, who is now feverish in bed. The doctor says she'll need to take him to the hospital in town tomorrow, and from the look on her face, we know that's not going to happen. The next morning, Ben is catatonic. David decides to show off his pretty much non-existent swimming skills, but the whole pool gets really, really wavy. Ben wants to jump in and save him, but he can't move. Marion sees what's happening, but can't get out of the house fast enough because the doors won't open. As Ben watches helplessly, Marion finally makes it to the pool and pulls David out. All three of them decide it's time to leave this place. They pack up the car, and Marion says she needs to go in and tell Mrs. Allardyce that they're leaving. She goes upstairs and knocks on the old woman's door. Ben gets nervous and goes in after her. Ben goes to the old woman's room and finds the old woman sitting in a wheelchair. When he turns her around, he sees that it's really Marion, completely possessed. Ben then swan dives off the fourth-floor window onto the car, traumatizing David once again. Boom!
But it doesn't last long.
That's okay, though, because the old chimney crumbles while regenerating and buries David under tons of bricks, cleaning up the loose ends.
Feeding that luscious, luscious life force.
The Allardyce siblings talk in a voiceover while panning over the perfect, renewed house and grounds. They're so glad their old mother has returned to them. Of course, that's Marion, now possessed by the old woman. And we see that they've been added to the huge collection of photos in the sitting room.
So it's kind of a gigantic energy vampire. You know, it's kind of a vampire story, too.
Yeah, like every couple of years they get some new caretakers to come in and get eaten.
Sucks all the juice out of them and renews itself.
This is not a good house. It's the same house used in Phantasm, A View to a Kill, and True Lies, among many others. Yeah, you'll recognize this house. Well, it's a creepy old house, and although we see weird things happening and no one behaves normally, we really have no idea what's going on until the end when the house starts physically regenerating.
Yeah, there's clues, hints along the way. Yeah.
It still holds up pretty well, and it's very good.
Yeah, it was.
I'm not sure. This might be a contender for Best of the Week, actually.
Oh, I don't know. There's the Psycho movies coming up.
They're pretty good.
They were pretty good.
Psycho 2, 1983. First one was in 1960, so this is 23 years later.
And if you haven't seen the first one in its entirety, you know, more than clips, it'd probably be worth it to see. You should see the first one.
Oh, major classic. Yeah, you definitely need to see Psycho 1.
You should anyway. Yeah. But I think you'll get more out of Psycho 2 having seen the first one in its entirety.
I think if you just see the clips, you probably get most of it.
Most of it, yeah. But, you know, you should see the whole thing. And you definitely need to see 2 before you see 3.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, directed by Richard Franklin, written by Tom Holland and Robert Bloch, stars Anthony Perkins, Vera Miles, and Meg Tilly. 1 hour, 53 minutes. Spoiler-free, this is a years later sequel to the first Psycho movie. Norman is all better now and is being released from the asylum. The Bates Motel and the overlooking house are still there waiting for him, and things get more complicated from there. It's heavy on mystery and drama, and it's very nicely done. Entertaining and a worthy sequel.
Yes, it was.
I liked all three of them.
I did too. Yeah.
Yeah, supposedly they get worse as they go on, according to a lot of people. But it's hard to compare to the first one. But the 2 and 3 were both very good.
Yeah, I was thoroughly entertained in all three of them.
Yeah, I haven't seen 4.
Well, we open. There's a fourth one.
There is a fourth one, Psycho 4: A New Beginning.
I have not seen that.
We have it. We just haven't gotten to it yet.
There's also the TV series too.
Yeah, well, I don't
which
know.
Is like young Norman.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, how Norman became Norman. Yeah.
All right, well, what happens?
Well, we open with the famous shower scene from the original Psycho, and credits roll. We come back to a courtroom. Lila Loomis is there, and she's got a petition with more than 700 people who don't want Norman Bates released from the mental hospital. But the judge asks her to leave, and then he releases Norman, who is declared sane and cured, because petitions don't mean anything in a case like that. Dr. Raymond, he declares that Norman is fine now, but Lila isn't having it. Norman goes home to the motel, which is still there. There's a Mr. Toomey who has been running the motel in his absence. Doctor warns him that memories are likely to return with him living there, but he knows how to deal with that now. He's all right. Well, almost immediately, he finds a note from his mother and hears her voice. He's so afraid that he drops his clothes down the steps. Well, he goes to a diner in town where he's gotten a job as a cook's helper. He meets Myrna and Mary, waitresses, and Ralph the cook. Mrs. Spool is the manager. He hears Mary arguing with her boyfriend on the phone and learns that she doesn't have anywhere to go. He offers her a room at the motel. Mr. Toomey comes in, and Norman meets him for the first time. Norman finds drugs in the office as well as people having sex in the rooms.
No!
It's that kind of motel.
I thought all motels were kind of like that.
No, not all of them.
Okay, not that way. Not by the hour.
Yeah, Norman's not pleased, but Toomey kind of just shrugs it off, and Norman fires him on the spot. And then Norma and Mary have sandwiches up at the house. She hands him a great big shiny knife, and he's all weird and nervous about it. And she's a little nervous about him and thinks he might be up to something. Mary knows a little bit of Norman's history, so he tells her half the story. He then begs her to stay because he's afraid to stay by himself tonight. He shows her up to her room at the house, not the motel, and leaves her alone. And she goes to bed with a chair under the doorknob, but nothing happens. And next morning, Mary comes to work and tells Norman she's gonna live in town with a friend. Toomey comes in, and Norman isn't happy to see him. He's also rude with Mary, accusing her of spending the night with Norman. He presses the point and argues with Norman, and Norman finds another note from Mother and gets upset, understandably, but nobody else sees the note, and Ralph sends him home. Well, that evening, Mary relents, comes back to stay at Norman's again. She comes upstairs, takes a shower, and you think, uh-oh, shower scene. But no, nothing happens. But we do see someone peeping through a hole in the wall. Toomey, outside, obviously drunk, starts yelling. Norman gets a phone call from Mother, and he thinks it's Toomey, just faking him out. Toomey turns around and sees someone in a dress, and it's someone in a dress with a big knife. And it's someone who kills Toomey.
I guess he wasn't that. He wasn't the murderer.
And we only see him from the waist down.
Yeah.
We don't know who this murderer might be.
Which is the same way we saw Mother in the first movie. Uh-huh. We didn't see Mother's face until the end.
So, we're left wondering, is this Norman or, could it be someone else? Well, Dr. Raymond comes in the next day wanting to know why Norman quit the diner. Well, he says he fired Toomey and he's going to run the hotel himself now. And, that's a full-time job. Mary finds the hole in the wall, and it leads to Mother's room. Raymond goes to see Sheriff Hunt, and they have a talk about Norman. Raymond wants them to tap Norman's phone and listen for Mother's phone calls, but Hunt says he can't do that. Because apparently if they're, there could be, are they real phone calls, or is Norman imagining it?
Well, Raymond is starting to wonder that somebody's playing pranks on him.
Yeah, he thinks that somebody's trying to pester Norman.
And the sheriff here is pretty reasonable about the whole thing.
Yeah, he's very smart, very sensible. he's a good guy.
He's kind of on Norman's side.
He's a good guy, yeah. Norman, down at the motel, sees his mother standing in the window up at the house, and he runs up there, but he doesn't see anyone inside. We cut to some kids breaking into the basement of the house. They've done this before. Place to have sex and hang out and have drugs, because the house has been abandoned for years, except now they hear something in the next room, and it's the knife-wielding, dress-wearing person that we don't see again. And the girl gets away, but the boy becomes dead meat. So, she's...
And as the mother kills the boy down in the basement, he claws at the window to get out, leaving dirty handprints on the window.
Yeah, it's
very
obvious.
And then in the third movie, they show that window, and the handprint is still there. That was pretty cool.
Except they cleaned it up in the...
No, they didn't clean the windows.
She didn't?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
There was a definite callback in the third movie.
Oh, I missed that. Okay. Well, Mary lets Norman out of the attic. He was locked in. He says it was whoever has been pretending to be his mother. He says that there's a note, but she doesn't see it. The police come to the door. The girl told them that she saw her boyfriend murdered in Norman's basement. Norman says he doesn't know anything about it, and they all go down there to look around, but there's nothing to find. And in fact, everything is tidy and cleaned up now. Mary lies and says she cleaned up several days ago and gives him an alibi. And Sheriff tells Mary more about Norman's past and then leaves. Norman thinks it's all starting again. Well, Lila Loomis comes to town and talks to the sheriff. She wants to know why he hasn't been arrested for the murder of the boy. Well, Sheriff Hunt says Mary was with him at the time, and there's absolutely no evidence, and the girl had been drinking or drugging, and so, there's nothing to go on to arrest Norman. And Lila wants to know if he's dragged to the swamp.
That's where he used to dispose of the bodies.
Yeah, that's what Norman did. Well, Mary goes down to the motel office and runs into Lila, who is her mother. Mary tells Lila there's no way Norman killed the boy in the cellar. He couldn't have done it. So what difference does it make? We want him recommitted. Mary, people don't change. She's really hell-bent on getting him locked up again. But Mary knows he was up in the attic when the murder happened. Mary says that she thinks there's someone else in the house, and she thinks Norman is really trying hard to be sane now. But Lila is not supportive.
So Mary is Lila's daughter. Mm-hmm. They're working together to get Norman recommitted. Initially, but it sounds like they're not doing the murders.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah. And initially, but Mary has started to like Norman and see how hard he's trying and realize that, of course, he's not really killing. But who is then? Well, Mary knows there's someone in the house, so she pulls out a pistol. She calls Lila, but she hasn't gone back to her hotel. Norman swears his mother is in the house, and Mary tries to talk sense into him. Dr. Raymond comes by for another visit the next morning, and he brings up Lila. He warns Norma that she's Mary's mother, and he says they're trying to undermine Norman's sense of reality. And that's the least of Norman's worries now that his mother is back from the dead. Raymond says that either Mary or Lila has been dressing up and calling and sending notes, but Norman is doubtful. In town, Mary accuses Lila of all those same things, but Lila denies it all. Mary doesn't believe Lila's story. She thinks her mother's all behind all of this. Well, somebody is.
Somebody is, yeah.
There's this doctor that keeps coming back. I was suspecting the doctor at this point, Dr. Raymond.
Or, Norman could be really crazy again.
Or could be, yes. Well, Dr. Raymond has Mrs. Bates' body exhumed to prove to Norman that she's really dead. Well, okay.
Yep, that's her.
Yeah, that's her, but yet he goes home and tells Mary what Raymond said. Norman gets a phone call from his mother. And Mary says, well, there's no one there. Has he really gone crazy this time? Norman comes to the conclusion that Mrs. Bates isn't the one calling him. It's his real mother.
What?
Well, Mary comes clean about Lila and their plan. The deputy comes to take Norman to the swamp. The sheriff has found Mr. Toomey's car in the swamp. Uh-oh. Mary asks the sheriff if he knows if Norman was adopted. Oh, so there is a real mother. Or something going on there. In town, Raymond starts to follow Lila. She goes to Bates' house and puts on a dress and a wig. Except someone else in a dress and a wig comes up behind her and kills her.
There's so many dresses and wigs.
Yeah, so Lila was dressing up, but not the killer, apparently. Okay.
Or maybe not the only killer.
The only killer. Yeah, it's confusing. Yeah. Raymond goes inside after her, and Norma finds him down there. Norman tells Raymond about his real mother, someone completely different from Mrs. Bates. She told him that on the phone.
And of course, Dr. Raymond thinks he's
crazy.
Yeah, it's a scam.
Yeah, somebody's scamming him. Mary comes to Norman, and she wants them both to leave town before they get connected to Toomey's body and car. Norman talks about his real mother to her as well. Dr. Raymond calls from the motel and says that the calls to him have come from the motel office. Norman has a long talk with Mother after Raymond hangs up. Mary runs into the basement and grabs the dress and the wig. She comes upstairs dressed as Mrs. Bates. She orders Norman to hang up the phone, but he looks like he's gone completely mental this time. Dr. Raymond grabs Mary, thinking to catch her in the act, and she stabs him to death, mostly by accident. Norman says he'll cover up for his mother, and she stabs him a couple of times. And then they find Lila in the cellar, and Mary blames Norman. The police come in, see Mary in the wig and brandishing the knife, and they shoot her.
Case closed.
Case closed, yeah. The sheriff tells what happened. Mary and Lila killed Toomey, Raymond, and that boy in the basement, and then Mary killed Lila. He says right to the end it was her saying that was Norman who was crazy. So, case closed. The sheriff drives Norman home. He was the victim in all this. And night falls, and Norman's mother walks up to the front door. What? We see, Norman's in the kitchen, and here's, from the waist down, we see Mother coming up to the steps. Except, no, it's Mrs. Spool from the manager of the diner in town. He says he was expecting someone, he just wasn't sure when, and he wasn't sure who it would be. And he makes her tea, and we see that he pulls down the box of poison that he has. She's Mrs. Bates' sister and his real mother. She gave the baby to her sister to raise since she was going through some mental issues herself. And by the time she got out of the hospital, Norman had already been locked away. The poison is kicking in, but he whacks her over the head with a shovel to hurry things along. He carries her body upstairs to Mother's bedroom. She wants to sit in the chair and look out the window.
That Norman, he's a good boy.
He's a good boy. Always taking care of his mother.
Well, it's multiple levels of plots and schemes, and it all makes sense at the end.
Yeah, if you got the impression from that synopsis, it's a little complicated.
It is. Yeah. But the sheriff is surprisingly reasonable and handles everything exceptionally well, which is surprising for a portrayal of a small-town sheriff. They're usually incompetent idiots or corrupt or something, but not here.
He's a good guy.
Dr. Raymond seems very more hands-on than any psychiatrist I've ever seen in the movies. He keeps coming around to the house. He actually called the phone company and things traced. He's more of a detective than a psychiatrist. But it's definitely more of a whodunit or did he do it than a pure horror film, but it's really good. The ending is perfect. Only your mother truly loves you. That's true.
That's true.
All right, and then in the middle of the week, we stop and have some coffee. Short film this week is called Coffee from 2023, and it's by Deformed Lunchbox. And I don't know who wrote it, don't know who directed it, don't know who stars in it, but it's Deformed Lunchbox. I don't know if that's like a troupe or what. Runtime 2 minutes, 36 seconds, so it's super short. And we got a link in the show notes where you can watch it on YouTube. What happens?
Well, Joe goes to Mr. Keller's house for an opportunity. Keller slurps his coffee loudly and offers Joe a cup. It's my special blend, very special. And Joe likes sugar. I'm kind of known for my sweet tooth. Yes, I'm aware, he says. Yeah. And that is special coffee. I'll try some of the dark roast, please. Deformed Lunchbox, like Brian said, doesn't have any actor or filmmaker credits. The acting is, gets the job done.
Well, they're two really weird guys, but they kind of talk strangely. So you want to say that they're bad acting, but it's okay.
It fits perfectly because both characters are kind of odd.
Yeah,
and so that's probably fine. It is fine. It's good. In retrospect, the story is a little predictable, but I didn't see it coming. You didn't see it coming.
Nope.
You say here it's predictable, and yet we didn't see it coming.
Well, I'm not surprised at the way it played out.
Well,
but yeah, I did not see it coming.
We like our shorts like we like our coffee, short and dark. But anyway, yeah, this was a good one. Yeah, and you should check out. I'm assuming they have a YouTube channel. I didn't check out their other stuff.
I assume so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've done some things by them before.
But you should check this out. Everybody should check this out.
What's next?
Psycho 3, which was 1986.
Only 3 years later.
Directed by Anthony Perkins.
Now, he said he didn't like this movie very much. He didn't think it was well directed, and he directed it himself.
Yeah, they kind of, well, and that was part of the wooing back. He was reluctant to have a Psycho 3, and they said, well, you can direct it. That means you get paid for directing and acting, and, you know.
And he specifically said he was not a good director and he didn't enjoy it, but I thought it was very good. It was fine. The directing looked good to me with the camera work and such.
I thought so, yeah. Uh-huh.
Written by Charles Edward Pogue and Robert Bloch, stars Anthony Perkins, Diana Scarwood, Jeff Fahey, Roberta Maxwell. Hour and 33 minutes. Trailer in the show notes. Spoiler free. What happens?
Well, after the second movie, Norman is living his best life at the motel and with Mother at the house. And it's interesting to see it so out in the open to us this time, and how Norman deals with the people who keep coming into his life. Things still don't necessarily go like we expect. And this was the least successful of the Psycho movies financially, and reviews at the time were mixed, even reviews from Norman himself. But we horror guys liked it quite a bit. And you will get more out of it for sure if you've seen the first two movies.
There are fewer surprises this time. Mother,
Cause
we know what Mother is.
We know he's openly, he's just crazy, and he's embodying Mother now. But
yeah,
and yet it's still fascinating.
He's got the dead body upstairs. He is Mother when he needs to be. He's crazy Norman, and we know where things are when this starts.
And then things happen to him. People come to him.
We open up to Maureen, a nun, screaming, "There is no God." She climbs the church tower and gets ready to jump to her death with suicide. She doesn't jump, but she does accidentally knock the helpful nun to her death below.
Whoops.
The nasty nun behind her says, "You'll burn in hell for this," and credits roll. Oops.
Yeah, oopsie.
Nuns are such fun people.
Yeah.
Maureen sits by the side of the desert road, still distraught. It's like she got thrown out just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, walked out with her suitcase.
And she walks through the desert until she's picked up by Dwayne Duke, a musician. He's all over her pretty much instantly. She's not wearing her habit anymore.
Right.
And he's very talkative, and she seems deeply depressed and still in shock. It gets dark and a storm hits, and he doesn't want to drive anymore. But he wants to make out in the parked car, but she's been a nun for years, so she gets out of the storm and runs away. It looks very wet.
Yes.
Well, it's morning at the Bates Motel, and a bunch of birds eat from the feeder and then die. Norman has poisoned them for his taxidermy hobby. We see in a newspaper that Emma Spool from the previous film is still missing. I wonder where she is.
Huh, I know. Taxidermy upstairs at the house.
Duke honks his horn to get Norman's attention. He saw the help wanted sign in the window, and he's interested in the job. Norman doesn't even care about the application. He's hired. Duke says he's not planning on staying around for too long, but he'll do it for a while. Why does Norman need help? Nobody stays there.
It's not a busy place. Yeah, I don't know.
From the sound of things later on in the movie, they get like 1 or 2 busy nights a month.
Mm-hmm.
And one guy can handle it.
It sure seems like it.
Oh, well. Wouldn't be a story otherwise.
That's right.
Over at the diner, Statler and the sheriff talk about Mrs. Spool's disappearance. There's a woman there who says she drove all the way from L.A. to see Norman, and the two men stick up for Norman. The guy just wants to be left alone in peace. She's Tracy, and when Norman comes in, she wants to interview him about the insanity defense. Is he a murderer, or was he not found guilty of a crime because of insanity?
Well, I think he did murder. They know he murdered. But
in a case like that, are you a murdering felon if you're declared insane?
But he was declared insane and then cured.
Legally, what happens with that? Once you're released, do you still have a felony on your record?
I think it can vary from place to place. I don't know federally what the law is.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, but she's not happy about it, whatever it is.
Because they know he murdered and he was guilty of murder.
You go to the mental hospital instead of prison. If there's a death sentence, you don't get that.
Not guilty by reason of insanity, and then you're cured enough to be released. Yeah, good question. Are you still a felon?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, in the middle of the interview, Norman watches Maureen get off a truck and is distracted by her. She's got the short blonde hair and she's got the same figure. She resembles Marion Crane, the woman he killed in the shower all those years ago. And she's got the same initials, MC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he sees it on the suitcase.
Maureen walks to the motel and runs into Duke, who apologizes for last night. Duke then overcharges her for room rent and keeps the difference. He gives her cabin number 1, which makes Norman nervous. Don't let people stay in cabin number 1. That's a bad place.
The infamous cabin.
Norman has a talk with Mother upstairs, and she picks on him. You can't get rid of me, she says. Well, Duke meets Tracy at the town bar, but they don't get along until she finds out that he works at the Bates Motel, and she fills him in on Norman's history. Meanwhile, Norman uses the peephole to watch Maureen undress. Mother comes into Maureen's room as she bathes, but finds that Maureen has already slit her wrists. Oh.
Complication.
Can't stab her.
Yeah.
Maureen hallucinates Mother as the Virgin Mary, with the knife being a dazzling shiny cross. Maureen wakes up later in the hospital, and they tell her that Norman found her while taking fresh towels to her room. He offers to let her stay at the motel for a few days to get her head on straight. Duke brings a girl home from the bar, and we see that he's redecorated his room to look like a porn set.
Yeah, he's a classy feller.
He's a temporary worker, and this place, wow, it's something.
Yeah.
Where'd he get all that stuff in, like, a few days?
From the other rooms, I don't know, storage.
They have
his
sex
own luggage.
and then argue. He throws her out afterwards, and Mother kills her before she can even call a cab.
Mother kills the dirty girls.
Maureen talks to Father... There's plenty of them at this motel. Maureen talks to Father Brian, and they discuss her lack of faith and her desires. He points out that God saved her from suicide twice now.
And even here, I was going to mention, too, it's skillfully filmed. You know, you don't see that it's Norman dressed up as Mother even here.
We don't know.
We assume it is, but even here, we're not 100% sure because the way it's filmed, we don't see her, him, them, their face, you know, or anything.
At the motel, it's homecoming weekend, and the place is finally crowded for once. Tracy wants to know more about the voices coming from Norman's house, and he asks her not to come back again. Tracy checks out Mrs. Spool's house and finds that the phone number for the Bates' motel is written in several notes. Why'd she have that all over the place? Norman and Maureen go out to dinner, and he shows her how to dance. My mother taught me. They go back to her room. Can you imagine him dancing in the attic with old dead corpse?
Ew.
They go back to her room, and Maureen is ready for some earthly pleasures. But Norman says that wouldn't be right, and leaves. Mother calls Norman a dirty, dirty, dirty boy.
Yeah. And has bad things to say about Maureen. Yeah.
Mother wants to kill Maureen, but Norman doesn't want to. Mother does go to the motel to kill one of the homecoming partiers, and Norman finds that body soon after. The next day, the police come to see Norman. Tracy fills Maureen in on Norman's history. The police are looking for Patsy, one of the guests from last night who didn't come home. The sheriff has a warrant, and Norman runs up to Mother's room to keep the sheriff out, but Mother's not there.
Which is a surprise for everybody,
Including Norman. He didn't move her.
Yeah.
Well, the police look around, but they don't find anything suspicious. Tracy and the sheriff argue, and they're standing right next to Patsy's dead body in the ice machine and don't notice.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, too. She's mostly entirely buried in
Except
the
for bloody
ice,
hands.
and there's some blood, and the sheriff is reaching in there, taking ice cubes out and crunching them down, and gets a couple of them that are a little bit bloody too.
Doesn't notice.
Nobody notices. Yeah. But it's a very tense moment, and Norman's standing there watching.
He knows.
Yeah.
Well, Maureen gives Norman an airtight alibi, but she wants to leave and go stay with the priest. Norman goes back home and looks all over for Mother, who is now missing. Norman finds a note. I'm in cabin 12. Mother.
What?
Oh, that's Duke's room.
Oh.
Norman goes there, and Duke sings him a song about his mother and then reveals that he stole the body from upstairs. Duke has blackmail on his mind. There's a fight, and Norman kills Duke.
And this might be the first time that Norman has murdered, as Norman.
As himself, yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Tracy goes
Although it was heavily self-defense, too.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Tracy goes to see a man in a nursing home who recalls that Mrs. Spool spent a bunch of time in an asylum and that she had a son. She does more research and learns quite a lot about the Bates family history. Back at the motel, Norman works to dispose of a couple of bodies in the swamp. It's not a clean job when Duke isn't really dead and goes down fighting. Maureen returns while he's away and goes up to the house. When he comes back, she sort of kind of accidentally falls down the stairs and dies by being impaled.
And that was a homage to the first movie when the guy falls down the stairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The stairs don't look particularly dangerous.
Yeah, but they
Maybe
are.
don't have like a sword at the bottom. Tracy comes to the motel in search of Maureen, but finds her room empty. She comes up to the house, but Norman sees her. She comes inside and finds Maureen's body and Norman dressed as Mother. Then she finds Mrs. Spool in the bedroom, Mrs. Spool's body in the bedroom as Mother protests the truth. As she tells what happened between the crazy Spool and Norman's real mother, he has a moment of clarity and stabs the mummy to death.
Yeah, I think it, short-circuited him a bit, too, because he was being Mother, and yet Mother was still sitting in the chair, too. I think,
Yeah, you can't really have it both ways.
Yeah, between that and her, talking to him, it's like, okay. A moment of clarity.
Well, the next morning, the police take Norman away, back to the asylum. He's got a big smile on his face. I'm finally free.
Yeah, the sheriff says, you're not going to get out ever this time. And he says, but I'm finally free.
Yep. And they drive him away, except he's still got a souvenir.
He took a little something. They're not going to let him keep that.
No. To fully appreciate the third installment, you really have to see the first two, and all three in order. Yeah, 3 does not make a lot of sense if you haven't seen 2.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you've seen clips and know the basic idea of the first one, you could probably get by watching 2 by itself, but it's best to watch all 3.
Yes.
Anthony Perkins directed this one, but he did feel that came out as well as he wanted it to. I thought it was really well done, but this was the lowest grossing of the Psycho movies. And I don't know if the fourth one was made for TV or what the deal was with that, but it was barely had Perkins in it, I'm pretty sure.
I haven't seen the fourth one.
Yeah.
I think I barely knew that the fourth one existed.
It's on our list. We'll get to it eventually.
Okay.
It's well-paced and doesn't drag anywhere. It's fairly clear here what's going on. There's not a lot of conspiracy this time around. We liked it.
Yes. Yes, we did.
So you got any questions?
Whatever happened to Baby Jane?
Heck if I know.
Oh.
Well, I guess we should watch the movie and find out.
She was, she went to this energy vampire house, and it sucked the life force out of her.
Oh, yeah.
And she died there.
It's Betty Davis week. We didn't even know that.
Because it's Betty Davis again.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from 1962. Directed by Robert Aldrich. Written by Henry A. Farrell and Lucas Heller. Stars Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, and Victor Bono. 2 hours, 14 minutes. Spoiler free. I read the last one, right?
Mm-hmm.
The acting is amazing, and it's all around considered a classic. Pretty much universally loved and adored on every must-see movie list. Horror guy Kevin is going to blaspheme a little and say it's all that, plus it's a bit long and tedious.
I thought it was. Watching it all the way through, well, it is 2 hours, 14 minutes. It's great, and yet, it seems a little long.
Have you seen stage plays? You're a stage play kind of guy.
Yeah.
That are probably quite a bit shorter?
A stage play version of this, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I haven't seen this on stage.
All right.
I know it has been done on stage.
You said you saw the remake.
Oh, yeah, that was the movie, though.
Yeah, movie remake. It's shorter, I imagine.
It seemed like it.
2 hours and 14 minutes is fairly long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Plus, it's black and white, and I mean, it's.
Oh, I don't mind black and white.
It tends to drain a little bit, but okay, I liked it. But yeah, it's not something I'm eager to see again. All right, well, what happens?
Once upon a time in 1917, Baby Jane Hudson has a sold-out show. She's the diminutive dancing Deuce from Duluth, and she's a cute little girl singing and dancing, child star of the stage. And they even sell dolls of her in the lobby.
Merchandising.
In
1917, really?
Yeah, I
okay.
guess so, yeah. Well, her sister Blanche does not look impressed. Jane throws a tantrum in front of a bunch of church women, and they don't seem impressed either. Well, 18 years later, in 1935, Jane gets into Hollywood, but she can't act and is a raging alcoholic. However, there's a clause in her contract that states for every picture Blanche is in, Jane has to be in one as well. So the company's kind of stuck. They love Blanche. She's good. She's a star, a genuine movie star. Well, the producer says Blanche is the biggest thing in movies today, but the producer wants to dump baby Jane entirely, and that's up to Blanche. Well, we see there's an accident with her car where Blanche winds up in a wheelchair and Jane ends up in an institution. Credits roll.
Well, that escalated badly.
Yeah, it did. Well, years later, in the present, Liz and her mother, Blanche and Jane's next-door neighbors, talk about
in the present being 1962,
Oh, right,
so this is
yes.
really old.
Yeah, so they're both older now.
Joan Crawford and Betty Davis
Joan
as
Crawford.
they were then.
Yeah. Previously it was younger actors playing them.
Yeah,
And now
they're both old women at this point.
Yeah, now we're the old women. Yeah. They talk about never seeing Blanche, and Jane is fat and weird. Well, meanwhile, upstairs, Blanche is watching TV from her wheelchair, and baby Jane looks like a 70-year-old drunken child. Yeah,
she's got the curly hair and
she's got
too much makeup
and dressing like the little girl dress. Well, the two clearly don't get along.
You know it's bad when you peaked at 7.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, people are still watching Blanche's movies, but baby Jane, she's mostly forgotten, and baby Jane ain't good with that. Well, Blanche's nurse, Elvira, says Blanche needs to talk to Dr. Shelby about Jane, and Blanche makes excuses for her. Blanche says that Jane is keeping her... Elvira tells Blanche that Jane is keeping her fan mail from her. She's sick, and she's not getting any better, Elvira says. But Blanche is, no, she's fine. She's my sister. I love her, Well, in the past month, she's been getting a lot worse. Blanche talks about selling the house, which is something that Jane wouldn't like. Jane gets drunk and imagines her doll singing. Blanche, upstairs, hears her crazy sister singing downstairs. And she does the whole act like from when she was a little girl.
It's like a 7-year-old with the curls doing the tap dancing and the white dresses. I guess it's cute. But when a 70-year-old woman's doing exactly the same act, it's really weird.
Oh, it's just sad. Yeah. Well, Blanche tells Jane that they're out of money and will need to sell the house. They can't afford to keep it. Jane pulls the plug on Blanche's phone. Jane serves Blanche her dead parrot for dinner. Ew. Jane goes out the next morning. Blanche wants to make a phone call, but she can't get down the stairs, being in a wheelchair and all. Meanwhile, Jane goes to the newspaper and puts an ad in the personals section. Blanche throws a note out the window to Mrs. Bates, but Jane intercepts it.
This is a neighbor working in the yard right outside. Why did she not just yell?
Help! Say, hey, Mrs. Bates, could you call the police for me? No, she didn't do anything like that. And Jane intercepts the note, so okay, they're stuck. Well, they argue about who bought the house. First, Jane says her father bought it for her, and then Blanche says no, she bought it. So then Jane changes her story to say she bought it. And she's just, a loose grip on reality, apparently. She also insists neither of them will ever leave this house. More and more, Blanche is becoming a prisoner in her own home as Jane torments her. Jane pays Elvira and tells her to take the week off before feeding Blanche a dead rat. And Jane cackles. She's got a great cackle in this.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those, where she brings the dinner in and Blanche, of course, is very hungry by this point because Jane's been depriving her of food, brings it in on a tray with a covered dish, fancy silver, and then leaves the room, and Blanche, picks up the cover and shrieks, and Jane's outside in the hallway listening, cackling. It's an awesome scene. Elsewhere, Edwin Flagg plays the piano and circles Jane's ad for an accompanist for her showbiz act. He comes over for an interview, and once again Blanche doesn't make a peep. Edwin has no idea who this crazy old bat is, and she sings terribly, but he needs the money, goes along with her. Jane takes Edwin out to dinner. Meanwhile, Blanche is upstairs starving. She finds the checkbook and learns that Jane has been forging her checks. She eventually tries to crawl down the stairs and get to the phone, but she's too slow. She calls Dr. Shelby just as Jane returns. He agrees to come right over, but Jane kicks Blanche unconscious. Jane calls the doctor back right away and, impersonating Blanche, tells him to forget all about it. It's a perfect impersonation, too.
Well, it's because it's different voice.
Yeah, She did her. She did her. They recorded her voice and dubbed it over.
She can't act. She can't dance, but she
can
do a perfect impersonation of her sister.
Impersonation of her sister. Yeah. Well, Elvira comes by and Jane fires her. She doesn't give up that easily and lets herself in. She finds the buzzer disconnected and Blanche's bedroom door locked. Jane returns and the two women argue. Elvira enters the room, finds Blanche bound and gagged hanging from her traction machine, so Jane kills Elvira with a hammer. Edwin comes over to practice, but she refuses to let him in and tells him he's fired. He loads Elvira's car into her car, and Elvira's body into her car as Mrs. Bates drives in. Edwin whines to his mother about the situation, and she remembers baby Jane trying to murder her sister with her car. The police call Jane, which sets her off again. She ungags Blanche, who talks about the accident so many years ago. The police bring Edwin, who's drunk, to Jane's door. She invites him in for drinks, as she promises to get him a real check now. When Jane comes out and shows him a baby Jane doll, he realizes that his mother's story was true. He puts the doll in Blanche's wheelchair. Blanche pushes over the bedside table, and Edwin hears it. He goes into her bedroom and finds her tied up. "Please help me," she whispers, and he runs downstairs, outside, and down to the street. Well, Jane panics and runs upstairs calling for Blanche. "Please help me, Blanche." And then she wheels her sister out to the car, takes her to the beach. In the morning, they announce on the radio that Blanche has been abducted by her sister Jane, and Elvira's body has been found. So the jig's up, and police are looking for him. But meanwhile, Jane's making sandcastles at the beach next to her nearly dead sister Blanche. A couple cops stop at the ice cream stand by the beach and find Jane's abandoned car. Blanche wakes up and admits that it wasn't Jane that ran her over with the car. Blanche was driving. Jane was drunk, so Blanche wouldn't let her drive. And Blanche hated her sister, tried to run her over, but hit the gates instead and broke her own spine. And she crawled out of the car, and they were both laying there, and everybody assumed it was Jane's fault because she was drunk and confused.
And that was the impression we had through the whole movie, too, was that Jane put her in that wheelchair, but no, she did it to herself.
Yeah, so Blanche did it to herself and got Jane institutionalized, and probably the institutionalization screwed her up.
Yeah.
Big time, yeah. Well, the cops spot Jane buying ice cream and ask her about her sister. The crowd is big, and all that Jane does is dance for them like she used to. She's the center of attention again. And then they find Blanche.
Well, Blanche could have screamed out the window for her neighbors at any time. She also had several opportunities to get downstairs to the telephone, but instead waited too long. Yes, she was in a wheelchair and couldn't roll down the steps, but she could have managed it. 'Cause she did at one point. She could have done that much earlier.
Yes.
When she finally did call the doctor, she could have simply said she'd been kidnapped or held hostage, but she doesn't. What does she say? Just come over?
Yeah, I need you to come over. Yeah.
Nothing
It's
sinister.
vague. Yeah, nothing implying that. Yeah.
Still, the acting is good, if not completely believable. And it started out a whole genre of films called hagsploitation.
I love that
with
word.
scary old actresses resuming starring roles. I'd call this more of a thriller than a horror movie, but it's got many of the same elements. And at the end, we still don't really know if Blanche was alive or dead at the end.
Mm-hmm.
She's just laying there. She was unconscious. Is she still unconscious or is she dead?
We don't know for sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Waiting for the sequel.
Where they say, this is what happened to Baby Jane.
Yeah. Okay, that's all we're going to talk about this week. Over at horrorbulletin.com, we've got two other movies. We've got High Life from 2018.
Which was a soothing kind of science fiction film.
I don't call it soothing.
I thought it was very soothing.
In a lot of ways, it's kind of boring, actually.
Well, actually it says that in our notes that I wrote.
It's
too.
quiet and slow moving for the most part, with some lively moments.
It manages to be brilliant and boring at the same time. But it's so quiet and soothing. It's a nice quiet movie.
It's about a bunch of prisoners on a spaceship headed to a black hole for a science project.
Yeah,
And
basically.
if you want to know more, you're going to have to read about it.
Yep.
We also watched The Orphanage from 2007, which is a bit of a complicated story, some of which didn't make sense the first time through, but it's well made, does keep your attention trying to figure things out, and it's full of ghosts.
Yes, it is.
So it's worth a watch, maybe even worth a second watch.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's our show for this week. Stop in over at horrorguys.com or horrorbulletin.com or horrorguyshop.com or horrorguyspodcast.com. Whoa.
Wow.
Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Mastodon, any of them places. Actually, we seem to be getting away from Twitter a little bit lately, don't we?
Well, you have.
Okay.
I have not made the leap yet, but yeah.
Used to be our daily website posts would go onto Twitter, and they don't anymore because Twitter broke. They're poopy heads.
Well, now I've started manually doing it.
Oh,
But
okay.
we don't know how long that's going to last. How long is Twitter going to last?
I wouldn't know bets at this point. All right. Well, I'm Brian,
And I'm Kevin.
and we'll see you next week.
See ya.